A city full of strangers, one act of kindness that changed everything.
Before we go on, I would want to welcome you back to my channel, Watch to Learn channel, Story Edition. Here, every story, fictional and non-fictional, has a lesson worth learning. If you love what we do, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment to tell us what you think. It really helps our channel grow. Now let's dive into today's story. It was a cold Wednesday night in downtown Riverton, the kind of night when the city feels both alive and indifferent. The streets glittered with neon signs and rain-slick reflections. And yet, beneath all that light, there was a darkness that clung to the alleys and the spaces between hurried footsteps. At 10:43 p.m., on the corner of Ash and Meridian, a man lay bleeding beside a toppled bicycle. He had been mugged, not for money, but for his delivery bag. Inside it were 6 steaming takeout boxes, a night's worth of earnings for Eli Turner, a 27-year-old gig worker trying to pay rent on a shared basement apartment. His attackers were gone. The street was nearly empty.
And that's where the story begins, or rather where it's supposed to end for most people. The first person to see him was Daniel Kerrigan, a corporate lawyer. He was walking fast, Bluetooth headset blinking, voice low and urgent. He saw the man, slowed for a moment, then looked away. "This isn't my problem," he muttered under his breath. He told himself he was late for a meeting, though deep down, he knew he could have spared a minute. 10 minutes later, a city bus hissed to a stop. The driver, Marisol Vega, spotted the figure on the ground. Her radio crackled. A voice called out, "You're behind schedule." She hesitated. Company policy forbade her from leaving the vehicle. She whispered a prayer in Spanish and drove on, the bus's red taillights fading like guilt into the night. Neither of them would sleep well that night. Around 11:10 p.m., a man named Samir Haddad stepped off the last train. He was a Syrian immigrant, a mechanic who'd just finished a 12-hour shift. He had little, a small apartment above his cousin's store, a second-hand jacket, a deep weariness in his bones. But what he had, he was grateful for. As he walked toward the underpass, he noticed the bike, the stillness, the faint groan of pain. He hesitated. Not out of fear, but because he'd been in that place before. Ignored, invisible. He ran over. "Hey, brother, can you hear me?" Eli's eyes fluttered open, dazed. His voice was faint. "They took the food." Samir checked his pulse, then tore off his own scarf to wrap around the wound on Eli's arm. He called 911 and waited not once but twice. After dispatch hung up on him the first time for not knowing the exact cross street. When the ambulance was delayed, Samir didn't wait. He hailed a rideshare, helped Eli into the back seat, and paid the fare himself, money he'd set aside for his electricity bill. What no one knew, what the news never reported, was that Samir had once been the man on the ground. 3 years earlier, before he'd gotten his papers, he'd been beaten outside a convenience store. 3 men had watched. None had helped. A fourth, a retired nurse named Mrs. Doyle, had stopped, knelt beside him, and whispered, "Don't you dare give up." She'd stayed with him until the ambulance came. When he woke up in the hospital, she was gone. He never learned her first name. He carried that night in his heart like a quiet vow. If I ever see someone in that place, I will not pass by. When Eli woke up in the hospital, Samir was gone. But beside his bed was a brown paper bag. Inside, a note written in careful handwriting. "The world is still kind. When you get the chance, pass it on." Sesh, Eli did. Months later, when he'd recovered and returned to work, he saw a woman on the subway platform struggling to lift her stroller. He rushed to help her. She smiled,
thanked him, and said softly, "You remind me of someone who once helped me long ago." The kindness had already begun to circle back, unseen, unstoppable. Word of the incident eventually reached social media, a blurry photo from a bystander. The caption, "Stranger helps injured cyclist downtown." It went viral for a day, maybe two. Then it faded from the trending page, replaced by the next scandal, the next outrage. But in the quiet corners of Riverton, something had changed. The barista who read about it online decided to give a free coffee to a homeless man. A bus driver stopped one morning to check on a man sleeping at the stop. A lawyer began volunteering at a shelter once a month. Small things, barely noticed, but seeds had been planted. Years later, when Samir was an old man, he'd tell his grandchildren about that night. They call it the story of the Good Samaritan. He'd say, eyes warm with memory. But I think it's really the story of the people who didn't to stop, because they remind us who we don't want to be. And the one who did because he reminds us who we can become. And then he'd pause, smile, and add, kindness doesn't wait for permission. It just acts. The Good Samaritan in the city isn't just about one man who helped another. It is about what happens when ordinary people remember their humanity in a world that often forgets it. It's about how one act, in the middle of a cold city night, can ripple outward in ways no one ever sees, changing not just one life, but many. And perhaps that's the untold story. Kindness doesn't always make headlines, but it always makes history. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear your take. Stay tuned for our next story, because every view is a chance to learn, and every lesson begins with you.